And this is just a little note from myself. That way when I organize these later, it's a little bit easier. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. I'll turn down the lights just a little bit so you can see that. Okay, so this is CIS1000. Everyone's in the correct class? Perfect. Okay, so my name is Dr. Bakley. Has anybody had me for any classes before? Okay, which class? Okay. So, and that was the online one, right?
No, Wednesday afternoon at 2:45.
Oh, yeah, okay. That had to get canceled halfway through the semester. Okay. So for those everyone else who hasn't had me before, my name is Dr. Bakley. This is CIS1000. So there's all kinds of different ways to get a hold of me, but by far the best is going to be email. The reason being is because I have a lot of classes. I'm off campus a lot. I'm not necessarily in my office. So you're welcome to call my phone number and leave a voicemail, but realistically the best way to get a hold of me is going to be by email. And by the way, so I'll say my last name a couple times because usually by halfway through the semester, people forget how to pronounce it and they just start calling me Dr. B. So it's Bakley. So there's a lot of stuff here, but I'd imagine for most people, this is your first class of the semester, correct? Nobody's had any 8 a.m. classes yet. Okay, so let's talk about, we'll talk about the course in a minute. But let's talk about the obvious thing that's going to cause some problems this semester. So obviously we're in the middle of a pandemic. Normally this is a pretty easy course, but with coronavirus, things that are normally easy are suddenly not so easy anymore. So out of curiosity, quick show of hands, how many people is this your first semester at IRSC? Yeah, that's usually pretty normal. So for most people, this is their first semester. So it's like, welcome to IRSC in the middle of the pandemic. This is your introduction to the college is in a very difficult time. Yeah. So the college does have a few rules. As of right now, I'm not sure what St. Lucie County is as far as the mask order, but as far as the college itself goes, we are requiring masks. Trust me, it's not fun, especially trying to lecture. But it's just, that's the rule. If you don't agree with it, I can't really do anything about it. You can complain to administration or whatever, but I really can't do much about it. So we are being asked to kind of work with students as much as possible. So rather than just flat out kick people out, I'm doing my best to try to get people masks. Now, officially, we have a department called Student Services, but they're like halfway across campus. So if you forget your mask and classes in 2 minutes, the chances of you getting that mask and getting back here are kind of low. So I'm going to try to get a better supply of extra masks. And we're all in this together. So there's already been a student that was nice enough to run down into their car to grab an extra mask. Turns out we didn't need it, but anything we can do to help each other. So there is the possibility, and not necessarily even a remote possibility, but there's a good chance that we may have, like, throughout various classes, rolling quarantines. So somebody may show up to class and then it turns out that they got tested positive, and I'm not sure what the school official policy is, but there's a good chance that the class will have to be quarantined. So we may not actually get to meet live all 16 weeks of the semester. Okay. Let's see if we can adjust this a little bit so it doesn't keep on falling. So we may not really get to meet live all 16 weeks. What I am doing is I'm recording this, which I usually don't for this course. Some classes I record, some I don't, but this semester I'm just going to record everything because I think there's a very good chance that we're going to end up in a situation where at least some of either this class or one of your other classes are going to have to switch to distance learning. So normally we make equipment available on campus. So like I realize not everyone in here always has a reliable internet connection, or maybe your home computer is like works when it wants to type of situation. I would do your best now to make sure that you actually have a reliable computer and a reliable internet connection, because it may turn out just with, you know, 1 day's notice, all of a sudden you have to start doing your schoolwork at home, okay? I think they were making some efforts to try to provide computers to students in certain situations, but I haven't actually seen a computer in a student's hands just yet, so I'm not sure where that is, but I know there were some talks about it. I don't know if it ever went anywhere. So just out of curiosity, there were, I don't know if you guys saw, but there were online sections of many of these courses. And my live sections, I was very surprised because within days, if not in some cases hours of being posted, like the classes were basically full. So just out of curiosity, does anybody want to share your reasons for taking the live version rather than online during these very uncertain times? You don't have to, yeah.
I learned better when the teacher is like physically there.
Yeah.
I took online classes during the pandemic and wasn't a fan.
Yeah, that's kind of the sense I imagine. How many people are in that situation? So I don't know if you heard him. You're in that situation where you just like live classes better, and
it's just the feedback that counts.
yeah, yeah. So I'm sort of in the same situation. It's actually, you'd think teaching online classes for instructors is easier because they don't have to sit, you know, and lecture. In a lot of cases, it actually turns out it's more difficult because for kind of basic, and I teach a lot of programming classes, but for kind of basic programming issues, there's been times where if we were in a classroom, I could have solved their problem in 30 seconds. But because we have to play email tag, we have to go back and forth, and they're trying to share screenshots of error messages, it might take 4 or 5 days to solve a problem that could have been solved in 30 seconds. So if I had complained enough, I'm sure I could have gotten more online classes, but I just think for your sake, we're in a difficult time, but it was worthwhile to at least make the attempt to try to get as much of the course live as possible. Now, that may not hold the whole semester. There's, you know, a lot going on, but anyway. So that's, any questions about coronavirus? I think I basically have the same information that you have. So the masks are mandatory. It's not necessarily even my rule, so I can't do anything one way or the other. Yes?
So if somebody does come up with like positive for coronavirus and say we're all in here, we all have to be quarantined in here, or would we be able to go back to our families and then have to quarantine?
I don't know exactly for sure, but I'm fairly certain that if somebody in this classroom were to show up with a positive test, that you'd probably have to self-quarantine, which usually means at home. And so it's not like you have to sit in like a hospital room or something by yourself, but avoiding contact as much as possible.
I've seen too much like Cloverfield movies and stuff like that.
Yeah. I'm not going to lie to you. It's going to be a rough time. This is normally a relatively easy course, so I'm hoping we make it through this without any issues. But I'm going to do my best to try to make things available and to work with you as much as possible. The other thing is that you have to communicate as much as possible. Again, email is going to be your best bet, and try to be clear about your emails, because sometimes I get emails that aren't necessarily very clear. If you have symptoms, or you think for some reason that you might have it, I would suggest just staying home. It's tough because the symptoms are very generic. It shares symptoms with many other diseases. So you might just have the common cold. But it's like, because it's being taken so seriously, you may end up in a situation where you went to class and then you caused 10 other people to have to quarantine. Whether or not you actually gave it to them, just showing up in the room with them, having tested positive, it kind of really throws the wrench in a lot of other people's lives as well. Okay, so just keep that in mind. So like I said, I am recording these. If you want, so I'm doing this through YouTube, which it's actually a live stream. So if you just don't feel comfortable going to class, or maybe you want to stagger, like say you just show up every other week, you're welcome to watch the stream at home, just as long as you have a reliable internet connection and it doesn't have to be an amazing computer, it just has to work. It just has to stay on long enough that you can get through a stream. So you're welcome to do that. You will still have to show up for your midterm and final or make other arrangements. So is anybody interested in that? Maybe staggering, showing up every other week and watching the lectures at home? Okay. So but that is an option. So I'm still going to record it because we may end in a situation, but okay. So anyway, so enough about that. So any questions about the pandemic? Okay. I think there is an official IRC page somewhere on the website. I'll send out an announcement about that if I find anything. Okay, so this course is, and you'll see me, by the way, switch back and forth to this. I've had these live streams drop before, and it's just kind of nice to know. So it says, okay, I get this. So you'll just see me every once in a while, just check to make sure it's actually streaming. So this course is Intro to Technology. For most people, it's not the most difficult course. And one thing I've seen with students is the tendency to, because of that, fall behind on their work, maybe not take it super seriously. I will admit some of the topics can get a little bit boring just because some of the things are very, very basic, like what is a web browser, some of these types of things. But especially if the lectures are recorded, you can always go through it at 1.5 times speed to get the information. What I don't want you to do is to completely skip out on the lectures and then just try to Google everything. Because a lot of times I see these answers to things that I didn't necessarily ask, and it's like maybe we had a class discussion about something and one of the assignment questions was directly based on that discussion, and then you went on to some whole other area that is completely unrelated. So please do your best to either attend lecture or, like I said, you're welcome to watch them at home. If the lectures are moving too slow because the information is too basic, don't forget you always have in the player the ability to play it at 25% faster, 50% faster, twice as fast, whatever. So these are the learning outcomes, but I'll just kind of give you the summary. This is very much a course, just the basics of technology. Now, for many people, this is like overly fundamental stuff. Like this is stuff that some of you may have had years ago, and you're just taking it because it's a required course. Just a quick survey, show of hands. How many people feel pretty comfortable with technology, and you're mostly just taking this because it was required? Okay. And I'd imagine that's usually the case with at least maybe 2/3 of the class, because most people are in here for the degree, correct? Is anybody in here not for a computer-related degree, like accounting? Sometimes I'll get accounting students. Yeah, but do you still feel like you're comfortable with technology? Yeah. No, but you feel like you're pretty comfortable with technology? Yeah, so. Okay. So that's kind of the overview of the course. We just kind of go through things. So as far as the book goes, it's kind of a tricky situation. So I don't, unfortunately for this course, because it's like such a standardized course, I don't really get to pick the book for it. The book is somewhat expensive. I quickly went on the bookstore. I think they're charging $200. Does that sound about right? Yeah. Okay. So I'm not going to necessarily require the book for class because I realize for certain people in certain situations where maybe like financial aid or something is paying for the book, for you it's, you don't really necessarily care if you purchase or dual enrollers. I think their schools buy the book. But for some of you, you're paying for this class out of pocket. And an extra $200 expense for how much are classes up to now for a full 3 credit hour class?
3 something.
Yeah. So you're talking 2/3 of the cost of the course on a book. And to be perfectly honest, the book it doesn't have some special information that you can just find out there on the web and other places anyway. So I'm not going to strictly require the book. If you've already purchased the book, you can take it back to the bookstore. And if they're giving you a problem about taking it back, just have them email me. I'll do what I can for them to take it back. It's a very expensive book. Now, some people do like having a book. One of the things that I dislike about this book and the publisher is they'll play this game where 16th edition of a book that's been out for less than 20 years is pretty much unheard of. What does that mean? It means they're literally publishing a new version every single year. Do you think technology changes that much in a fundamentals course that they actually need to? No. So they'll pull these things like maybe blockchain and Bitcoin is big that year, so they'll add a couple of paragraphs about blockchain. Boom, new edition, and then all of a sudden they'll change up some pages, and that version that you previously were using, you can't use anymore. I try to keep the course generic enough that you can use any of the past couple editions. One of the things that happens with old editions, let's say, so the edition we're using is the 16th edition, let's say the 15th or even the 14th edition. If you were to go on a site like Amazon and search for the 14th edition, my guess is it's probably like $5 or $10 because it's all market fundamentals. As soon as there's no demand for the 14th edition because nobody's using it anymore, everyone who has copies of it, the price goes very low very quickly. So all of a sudden, this book that was $200 2 years ago is now worth $5. So I try to be somewhat understanding. Now, if you're in a situation where it's just difficult to get a book at all, I do provide the PowerPoints, and just showing up to class or watching it virtually and paying attention during lectures, everything in the assignments is there. Okay, so I don't typically, I know most people in here that you're new with me, especially for my live classes, I try to stick to the assignments, midterm and final, which are multiple choice. But I won't ever you won't ever end in a situation where I say, open your book and turn to page 38 and do problems 1 through 5. Okay, does that make sense? That's why the specific edition doesn't really matter that much, is because it's more about the information in the book, which hasn't changed recently, more than the specifics of the book that page 38 happens to line up. Okay, so everyone, sometimes I go along too long about certain topics. Everyone's in a good spot there. You understand with the book. So if you're getting the book paid for, you're welcome to have the current edition of the book. Otherwise, you can get an older edition, say 14th or 15th. You can get those online very, very cheap. Otherwise, absolute worst case, if you're good about showing up to class and paying attention and taking notes and good about doing assignments, the course actually is self-contained, that all the information for the assignments and the exams will be directly in the course. Okay. So standard grading scale. The assignments are typically short answer type things. The one assignment that I do that's a little bit different, just to kind of give everybody an intro to the course, is the very first thing that I like to do is, this is a class about computers, and so what we do is we go on Newegg and we pick out all the parts that if you wanted to buy it, you could build a computer. And this just kind of gives you some familiarity, because for a lot of people, a computer, even if you're computer savvy and you've installed software, and I've even seen this, people who go through a computer science degree at a university where you spend a lot of time you're doing math and programming, they'll have never actually opened up a computer and actually said, okay, this is what a motherboard looks like. This is what a CPU looks like. They might know the theory of a CPU and all the theoretical properties, but have never actually even necessarily seen a picture of a modern CPU. And so that's what I like to do with the first assignment. After that, a lot of it is short answer type questions that we'll go over in class. And then you see that there's a midterm and final. Hopefully this takes some stress off you. So according to this grading scale, if you did perfect on all your assignments, you did everything, required and you did a great job on it and you got full credit on all your assignments, and you just aren't a good test taker. You studied, but maybe you just had test anxiety, whatever, and you didn't do great on the midterm and final. Can you still pass the course? Yes or no? Thumbs up if you can still pass the course. Yeah. Because, I mean, I'm not saying do this, but it's set up to where you can, you know, I don't want people not taking exams seriously. Obviously, take them seriously, but the assignments are the big thing. The reason is because I have to give the exam during one class period. There's only so much I can ask you during 1 hour. However, with the assignments, you might do a couple questions. One question you might think, okay, well, I think I have an answer for that, but let me think about it for a couple days. Yeah, I have a lot more flexibility in how I give the assignments. Typically, I do an assignment every 2 weeks. So that means just every other week you'll have an assignment due. And I think for most people that works pretty well for your schedule. Okay, that way you're not constantly having to do stuff. And if you miss a class, you still have some time to catch up. So it's not like I'll give an assignment and then it's due that Friday. Usually I give you a week and a half to 2 weeks. Now sometimes that clumps up a little bit. Like if we have a midterm due, sometimes I might give you 1 week for an assignment, but in general it's somewhere between 1.5 and 2 weeks. So I don't have, you've seen the grading scale. This is the grading scale. Assignments, midterm, and final. I don't take attendance, and I don't do participation grades. My general opinion is that this is college. The difference between like college and some other, let's say your high school, is that in college we have lecture. So I'm here to give you information, and then you might have labs or other things where you work on that, but it's very much like I'm giving you information. We might discuss it and talk about it, but it's not like a necessarily like a big group activity. Now, I do like to have discussions and other things, but if you're just here to get the information, I'm not going to force you to, you know, give some stupid answer just so you can get your class participation for the day, if that makes sense. Just to say something, just to say you said something, okay? Now, there is one time that you have to do official attendance, and that is the first day of class today. Now, I realize a lot of you don't have working computers, so just sometime in the next week, you go to attendance, and you don't even have to put your name because it automatically attaches it, and just hit submit. Okay, so you can do that right now if you have your own laptop or a working computer. If not, sometime before the end of the weekend, just try to remember it. And it's not even for me, it's just the school has official reporting requirements, and the first day of attendance is one of those. Okay. Trust me, the course will get more interesting. It's this first day, like, I always say that the syllabus reads like a legal document because I don't even write half of this. When I was in school, the syllabus was typically about a half of a page, and it just kind of gave you the instructor's contact information and what the course was about. So I think that's pretty much it. Any questions on anything? I think that's basically it. This is in Blackboard, so you can read this at any time if you want to go through all the details. But I'll give the 30-second summary. So, yes?
Do we have any, like, labs?
No.
No.
So the 30-second summary. So assignments are the bulk of your grade. The assignments will generally be short answer type questions, but for the first one, it's a little bit different. You can have a midterm and final, which are going to be multiple choice. The book, you don't necessarily have to have the most recent, or, you know, the 16th edition, just something that's kind of recent, like the 15th or 14th will probably be okay for this course. And then overall, this course is about technology and the fundamentals of technology. And the best way to get a hold of me is by my email address. Okay. So any questions before we get to the, I just kind of want to get started on the very first thing. Okay. So I always get people who are very experienced in technology in the course and have done a lot of this before. Just out of curiosity, how many people have built your own computer before? Okay. And was it to build a game machine? Yeah, that's pretty typical. To be perfectly honest, I actually don't do almost any gaming, but I still build my own computers. it's kind of nice to know what's inside of the computer, because then, you know, these days computers last a very long time. The current computer I have is 5 years old. It's a 6th generation Intel, which is, you know, that's getting up there in age. I might replace it soon, but I've had zero problems with it because I was able to make a lot of decisions on things like the cooling, and I overbuilt the power supply. So now in the corporate setting, you don't tend to do this. Why? Because computers take a little bit of time to put together. Now, when it's just your own computer, it's not that big of a deal. But imagine if you're working for IRSC and they had a new order of computers for this classroom, and you've got one technician that's responsible for it. It's going to take a little bit of time to put together. So in practice, in the corporate environment where many of you will end up, you're not going to actually typically build your own computers from scratch. But it is a good skill to know, because you are still going to many times have to fix these computers, and you kind of need to know the basic components, okay? Okay, how many people have been to Newegg before? Okay, so Newegg is just a, they started off sort of as doing computer parts, but they've expanded. I'll see like vacuum cleaners on here and stuff. I've seen random stuff. Actually, when the pandemic first hit, the first masks I was actually able to get were on Newegg, because Amazon and everybody else were out, and Newegg had a good supply chain, and I probably overpaid for them, but I was still able to get some masks. So, but their core focus still tends to be technology. And if you look just on the homepage here, you'll see most of the things scrolling through are computers or accessories, you know. And again, you'll see the random thing like a chair here, but
It's a massage chair.
yeah, it's an extra nice chair. So there are other sites. How many people have heard of the site PC Part Picker? Okay. Now I do like that site as well. And on the assignment, I used to make you go to Newegg, but over the years I've grown a heart, and I've realized that Newegg for some people is a little bit difficult to navigate, especially as they have all kinds of extra stuff on the site. PC Part Picker is almost like a guide, and it takes you it actually takes you through each component of building your own computer. Now, one of the nice things about Newegg is it's a little bit more open. We can browse. So we're probably going to make a couple of computers on Newegg, maybe a couple on here, but we'll start off with Newegg. But you can see here, for your assignment, it's going to be a little bit more constrained, a little bit easier. Okay, so we'll just kind of get started on this. I only want to lecture for a few more minutes and just get you familiar with some of these parts, and then we'll end it a little bit early today, because I think this class is normally supposed to be, I think, an hour and 15 minutes, but we'll cut out a little bit early today since it's the first class. Okay, so I'm on their sites. So most of the things you're going to find are under components. Now, when you have working computers, usually I like you to follow along, but in this case, a pretty large portion of the class doesn't have working computers, so we'll you can just watch up here for today. So just a quick history, and I'll try to keep this brief. There was a mathematician during around World War II who created the first computer. And I say computer in quotes because they didn't actually get out a bunch of hardware and create the first computer. What they actually did was the first mathematical computer. The first computers were actually more of a concept. He was actually able to prove mathematically certain properties and said, okay, if we have actual things to make this with, we have this kind of universal machine that anything that can be done with math, so addition, subtraction, multiplication, what's called branching, all these things, if I can do these mathematically, it can be done with this machine. Then what happened is that after World War II, this research started to gain some steam, and researchers, mostly military related and having to do with physics and things like that, realized that if we could build one of these, we could do really, really fast math. So the first computers were actually just very fancy calculators. There used to be a job where literally all you'd do all day is just compute numbers. I think that's where the term computer actually comes from, is that people would sit in a big room like this all day, and what a calculator can now do in a couple seconds, this is all they would do all day, every day. Not even a couple seconds, fractions of seconds realistically. Now that's a little bit too prehistory for this class. It's kind of an interesting thing, and I like to talk about it, and there's a lot of interesting things that happened after World War II. But there's a specific guy, John von Neumann. He came up with this architecture called the von Neumann machine. And that sort of set the basic components of how a modern computer still to this day works. And so essentially with a von Neumann machine is we have our main components, a CPU, computer memory. Now, computer memory, in practice, what happens to your RAM, your computer memory, when you turn off the computer? Does it stick around or does it go away? When you turn off your computer for your RAM.
Stays on.
So for your RAM, it actually goes away. Now, what would happen, that's not super practical, because what would happen every time you turned off your computer to all your files? All your files would get deleted. So what do we have to keep our files around? Yeah, so what's generically called storage, but the specific technologies that we use are hard drives, solid state drives, SD cards, and so on. So the main components that we're talking about so far, we've got a CPU, and the CPU you can think of generically as the brains of the computer. It does all the calculations, it does all that stuff. Now we have data that needs to sit somewhere temporarily while we do these calculations, and that data sits in your computer's memory. Think your computer's RAM. Now in practice, computers can't be on all the time, so we have our long-term storage devices. Now, if I took a CPU, RAM, and hard drive, and I just put them on a desk, could I do anything with that? No, it's not very useful in itself. I have to. These things have to be able to communicate with each other. So what thing do I plug these all into so they can communicate with each other? Motherboard, perfect. So we've got this thing called a motherboard. And we've got these different components that we plug it into, and the motherboard kind of just says, okay, the CPU wants to talk to the hard drive, I can make that happen. The CPU is requesting this chunk of memory, I can make that happen. And that's really the basics of a computer, is that we have our motherboard, we have our CPU, we have our RAM, and our storage device, typically like a solid state drive or hard drive. Now we're sort of getting there. What happens if I press the power button? What's going to happen? Nothing, right? We need something to power it. So what's that thing that we power it typically called in computer terms? Power supply. So we've got something to power all of this. And I think that's a good place to get started. So let's start talking about some of these specific technologies just briefly. In the next class, we'll get into a little bit more. So I'm on Newegg here. So one of the things we talked about are CPUs, and some of this terminology will be used interchangeably. So here they call it processors. Now in this course, I'm going to generally just talk about desktop stuff that you can go on these sorts of sites and buy, because gamers like to build their own computers. So there's lots of information about desktops. Server technology is a little bit more specialized. So you would kind of have to be kind of like in the know in the industry to know a little bit more. It's not like I can go to... if I were to go to a search engine, the chances of me finding information about the newest desktop processor versus server processor, there's probably 101 pieces of information about the desktop processor. So we're mostly going to focus on those. Okay, so we're already starting to see some things here. So I talked very generically about a CPU. It's the brains of the computer. But in the modern world, we don't just talk about things generically, because we have computers in front of us. And there are companies that make these CPUs. So in the desktop world, what are the two big companies for CPUs? Yeah, so one right here is Intel, and the other is AMD. So you're going to see these names a lot. Now, This is one of those things that people get very upset about. So I'm going to be very wishy-washy and non-committal about certain things. People really, really like their processors. It's kind of like in the old days where people would be like, you know, somebody likes Ford and somebody likes Chevy. For an outsider, you probably think, oh, they're just, you know, trucks. But for people who really like it, they're so. That's kind of how it is with processors. I've owned both, to be perfectly honest. So right now I've got an Intel. To be perfectly honest, probably my next generation computer that I build will probably be an AMD. But just get to know some of these names. Now, there was a time where, and we're sort of returning to that time, unfortunately, it was very, very difficult to compare CPUs. We'll get into this later, but they would have very, very complicated marketing. They would have, I could literally have 2 Intel CPUs and be unable to tell which is faster. There's something called the clock speed, which is kind of a good general indication. But the problem is that clock speed is much more complicated than they would like us to see. It sort of seems like they want to market it as just being a single number, but it's a little bit more complicated. So what they've done is both AMD and Intel simplified their processor lineup. We'll just talk about Intel for now. Is that they have i3s, i5s, and i7s. In recent years, they've also had the i9, so they've complicated it a little bit more. And the basic idea historically was like i3 is your basic computer. If you're a secretary working at an office and all you do all day is send emails, maybe open the occasional Word document, an i3 is probably fine. If you're a little bit more of a power user, maybe an i5, and then i7 would be reserved for people doing gaming, CAD, things that were a little bit more CPU intensive. And then they introduced the i9. It's got a little bit more complicated, but in general, AMD's kind of the same way. They have the Ryzen 3, Ryzen 5, Ryzen 7, and I think they have a Ryzen 9 as well. But it's much more simplified. So let's do this. We'll cut out a little bit early because I have a class after this that does need these computers working, a programming class. So what I want to do is end a little bit early just to make sure I can get some, at least a few of these computers working. So this will be the general format of the class, by the way. I try to do just information I think is good for you to know, important to know. So I'm not going to stick to the book or certain things very specifically. If you have any discussions, like some of you who have built a computer before, you might want to talk about your computer that you built and some of the decisions that you made. So we can have more open discussions as well. But this is going to be the general format of the class. And then every week and a half, 2 weeks, you'll have an assignment where some of the things that we talked about in class, you'll have to formalize, and I'll ask a question. Like one of the questions might be, name the 3 or 4 Intel product lines that we talked about. Okay, so something like that. Okay, so any questions before next week? Okay, so the thing that you have to remember is please, please, please take care of this attendance. It's under assignments, attendance, because the school takes it very seriously. After this, I don't really particularly care, so you just have to take care of it once for the first week so I can report it. Don't forget that this is recorded. It was able to successfully stream, perfect. And then don't forget your masks, please. I don't want this to cut into class time. I think for most people, it's just you flat out forgot. So I'm understanding. There are some people that are just opposed to masks. Like I said, if you're just completely opposed to a mask, you're more than welcome to either sign up for an online section of the course or just watch the lectures, okay? Okay, so any last minute questions? And then one more thing. Please watch these announcements, because every once in a while what'll happen is a student will email me something and I'll be like, oh, that's important information. Everyone should know that. So just keep an eye on these announcements. I usually try to also email them to you, to your Rivermail account. But just maybe sometime now, between now and next week, maybe like Friday, just check to see if there are any new announcements, okay? Okay, all right, well, good luck on the rest of your classes, and even with all the stuff related to the pandemic, I'm hoping for a good semester, and I think as long as everyone keeps up with their work, everyone should do pretty good in this course, okay? Okay, all right, I'll see everybody next week.